asked by my wife, Marilyn, and May Sewell, widow of Charles Sewell, an old friend of mine, to try to recollect some of the prisoner of war experiences that I had during the year 1944 to 45. I guess as a preliminary matter, I would say that when I went into the service, I was 15 years of age. I enlisted using my older brother's birth certificate. His name was Leroy E. Chamberlain, and he was, I believe, 19 at the time. But he was 4F for physical reasons. And I took it in my head to join the Army and contribute, I guess, somewhat to whatever the war effort would bring. I enlisted in 1942 on November 2nd, and I enlisted through the old Equitable building down in Baltimore City. It was the third attempt to join the service, and on that day, I first went to the Federal Post Office to enlist in the Navy. But the naval recruiter insisted on having some better ID than the birth certificate, and of course I had none. What I did do, though, was to run up the street to get my hair cut, and came back in the hopes of getting another recruiting officer, which I did. He started to process me, but as luck would have it, the first recruiting officer was to give me the eye exam. As soon as I put the mask up to my one eye to take the eye exam, he stopped me and said, "Wait a minute, weren't you in here a little while ago, an hour or two ago?" And I told him no. He must have me confused with somebody else, and he said, "The hell I do. You've been here before. I'm not happy with your ID. I don't think you belong in the service anyway because you look too young to me. So you've got to get out of here. If you want to join the Navy, bring your father down or your mother down, and we'll talk to you then." Well, gig was up, so I went up the street to the old Equitable building on, I believe it was Fayette and St. Paul Street in Baltimore, to join the Army, and they were nowhere near as particular. So that's how I enlisted in the service. They put me down as Leroy E. Chamberlain. They gave me serial number 13136164, and sent me upstairs in a smoky room with a bunch of other recruits. And we're told to stay there until time came for us to be transferred to Fort Meade. As luck would have it, we were there until about 8 o'clock at night, and wasn't sure that I liked this first day in the Army. But anyhow, they had to take us down. They marched us up Baltimore Street to a cafeteria. I don't think it was the Oriole cafeteria, but it was one similar to it. I think it was called Thompson's. Or it could have been, I think it was called Thompson. But anyhow, they let us go through the line and get ourselves something to eat. And then after about 30 minutes, they took us out and loaded us on a bus, and away we went to Fort Meade. I'm going to start this tape now with my arrival in England, particularly in a town called Prestwick, Scotland, where they had an airfield. After flying overseas from Georgia to Labrador to Iceland, we arrived in Prestwick, Scotland, and it was in early April of 1944. We stayed at Prestwick for about 2 days, and we were allowed to walk around the fields there. And I talked to my first foreigner, I believe, there in Scotland, a shepherd boy who spoke the old, I guess it's Gaelic, but the old Scottish language, and I simply could not understand a word he said. But he came over to our airplane, and he was asking questions about it, and I was trying to answer him the best I could. But I don't think he understood me any better than I understood him. He was dressed in a shaggy coat, but it was slung over his shoulders. It reminded me of something that John the Baptist would have worn back in those biblical days. And his hair was all dirty and curled and rumpled up, as were his feet and his hands. But anyhow, that was an interesting little experience there. I think it was the day after that, we cleaned the airplane up and washed the landing gear. I thought we were going to fly it down into our next base, but as luck would have it, this nice new airplane stayed right where it landed there in Prestwick. We were taken to a railroad station near Prestwick and given a pretty comfortable ride from Prestwick on down through England, down past London, down into Norwich, which was on the eastern side of England, right below the body of water called the Wash. And the name of the village that our camp was located at was called Eccles Roads, Eccles Road, R-O-A-D. I don't think it was a plural. I think it was Eccles Road. But anyhow, that's where the base was located. It was part of the 96th Bomb Group. I think I was in the 389th Bomb Squadron, but I'm not sure of that at all. But I am sure there was a 96th Bomb Group. After we arrived there, we didn't have too much to do for the first few days. Then some of the men were sent down for additional gunnery practice. I don't recall that I was, and I don't know why I wasn't, but it didn't go down. But it wasn't long before we were assigned a new airplane, which was a B-17G, I believe. It's a nice airplane, and we never did name it, by the way, because the crew couldn't agree on a name, and while we were bickering over that, it wasn't long before we were shot down. But anyhow, it was a nice airplane. The first mission I flew was on April 26th, 1944. That mission was over Pas-de-Calais in France. The briefings indicated that they were building a new secret, the Germans were building a secret weapon there. They were launching ramps for the new V-1, I think it was called the V-1 bomb. But I believe this ramp that we were bombing in April of 44 was a precursor to the V-1 because the word buzz bomb. And I also distinctly remember seeing a buzz bomb go over my head one night while I was in England. It was simply a robot flying bomb that made a terrible buzzing noise, and it only flew about 100 feet over the ground, maybe 150 feet over the ground. But anyhow, that's what we were told we were bombing at Pas-de-Calais. That mission was rather uneventful. Then we came back, and within a day or two, we took our second mission, again over the Pas-de-Calais area, and I believe it was for the same purpose. On that mission, I got my first taste of flak. I don't know what happened, but as we were going over the target, I remember looking down and seeing it was a beautiful day. At least it appeared to be that way to me, and I could see the P-38s flying up and down near the coast. There was no fighters, and there wasn't any flak at all. It was just, but when we got over the target, I didn't feel the plane lurch, and I didn't hear the bombs away. It appears that for some reason we missed the target. Now, whether it was some local cloud cover there or not, I don't know. But as a result of that, the whole group flew over the target, made a large turn, and came back to the initial point of the bombing run again and made a second run over the target. This time there were no P-38s strafing the ground, and I didn't see any fighter cover. Apparently the fighter planes had done their job on schedule and left, but for some reason we didn't hit our target. So while we were on this bombing run, that was my first taste of flak. And it was, of course, no fun. But we were pretty lucky because when we got back, we just had some minor damage to the airplane, dents in a few little tiny holes. But whatever, the ground crew didn't feel like it was necessary to tie the plane up. So the plane was ready again for the third mission that we started out on. This mission went over Berlin. That was a more eventful mission. I think we did see fighters, but I don't believe we were attacked. At least our group wasn't. But there was a tremendous amount of flak up over the Berlin area. But we managed to drop our load, and that mission went all right, and we got back safely. The next mission we took was over Berlin, but it was specifically a place called Peenemünde. And this was supposed to be a scientific complex where the Germans were experimenting on new weapons. Again, that mission was like a repeat of the first mission. I mean, of the mission I just described over Berlin, with the exception that our plane was severely damaged. Again, we didn't get attacked by fighters that I recall, but we had very severe damage to our airplane. But we got back safely to England. Because our plane was damaged so much on that last mission I just described, we had to use a spare plane. That's the plane that nobody uses unless their plane is shot up. The name of the plane was Ricky Tikki Tavi. And we got on to that mission. We got off pretty good. And we started to Berlin. But our plane couldn't keep up with the formation. I remember our engineer, Charles Chase, thought that we got to abort the mission and turn back because the plane wasn't in safe condition. This was something the pilot didn't want to do. His name, by the way, was Lieutenant I. He was from out west. I think it was Nebraska. He was a truck driver before he got to be a pilot, or before he joined the Army. But anyhow, he refused to turn back, and the engineer refused to stop telling him to turn back. And then finally, I remember the engineer telling him, "If you do not turn back, I will bail out." By this time, we were over France and not too far from Germany. But next thing I heard over the intercom was the pilot yelling, get back, we're going to go back." And with that, he turned the plane around, and we went back with a full bomb load, got back to our airfield all right. However, this is an action that is not looked upon with favor by the officers of the base. And they raised particular hell with my pilot about him coming back. And I remember one of the officers telling him, "If you think you're going to get away with this, you got another think coming, because there's another group going back over France in an hour or so, and you're going to have to go with him." I might say, though, the ground crew checked the plane out, and they said it was perfectly all right, no reason for us to come back. So the upshot of it was, for the second time that day, we took off again. And this mission was, I don't know where we were going this second time. I think it was a target in France. But anyhow, we got up over the Wash. We joined another group and started over toward France, when the same thing happened again. And again, we went through the same scenario. The engineer insisted he turn back. The pilot insisted he's not going to turn back. He had enough of this turning back business. He didn't particularly give a damn what happened, but he was going to deliver the bomb load on the target. And the engineer said, "You're never going to reach the target. I'm going. I'll see you someday, someplace else." And again, he started to go out, but the pilot caught him and said, okay, we'll go back. So that's what we did. Now, of course, again with a full bomb load, we came in and landed at base. But of course, this was the second time in the same day, and word got all over the base. When we went up to get a beer, the pen didn't want to talk to us. They were calling us abortion kings and all that kind of thing. But we accepted it, and then I believe it was the following day, might have been 2 days later, our plane was ready, and we had to report to the line for what would now be my 5th mission, if you don't count the 2 abortions. When we got there to the briefing room after breakfast, we were surprised by a visit from the colonel, who I presume ran the air base there. It was very unusual for him to appear in a briefing room. At least that was the first time I'd seen him. And after we got our briefing from the intelligence people telling us we were going to go back over Berlin that day, and by the way, this was on the morning of May 8th, 1944, the colonel came in to advise us that, number one, that we'd been on a lot of milk runs up to this point, but that those days were over. It was going to be a serious mission. And we expected a few problems. But he cautioned us and told us that he advised our pilots not to worry, because he would be there. And he advised our pilots to follow him, and everything would be all right. That as far as he was concerned, he was going to be the mother hen taking care of all their chickens. So, it made me feel a little queasy. I was a little nervous anyhow, but something told me then it was going to be a bad day. In any event, we got up to the line, got our guns fixed and loaded, and checked everything out, and took off. I might mention that on this particular mission, the other air crew that was housed in the Neeson huts with us had their plane shot up on the day of the mission before. That's the one where we couldn't complete our mission. And they were drafted to ride the Rikki-Tikki-Tavi on this particular mission. So after we got over France, I had been watching from a tail position for watching for the Rikki-Tikki-Tavi because there'd been so much commotion raised about it. And sure enough, it wasn't long after we got over France before it started mushing back and going back away from our formation. The plane simply couldn't keep up with the formation. So, and I was able to call the number through to my pilot that the plane was losing speed. And the pilot and the engineer both commented that was the plane that we had on the last mission. And the engineer asked me to keep an eye on it, and while he was saying that, it flew up in the air. All I saw was a puff of smoke and black dots flying around, and I saw one parachute come out, apparently from that explosion. This, of course, made us feel bad. We knew these fellows fairly well, although we tried not to get to know them real well because you know they might disappear one day. But it wasn't long after that when I noticed another plane turn around to a port, and I called that in to the pilot and the engineer and everybody else on the crew over the intercom. The pilot said, "That's the colonel." When he said that, my heart sank really, because I knew maybe he was having engine trouble, I don't know, but I just had a funny feeling that the colonel wasn't going to be there. Maybe I wouldn't want to be there either. In any event, we proceeded on the mission, and we did get hit over Brunswick. We got hit with fighters. I remember distinctly the Focke-Wulf 190s and I believe there were some Messerschmitts further out, but the 190s were the ones that were hitting us, and they hit us very hard. We were hit. I mean, our plane was hit with cannon in the front, particularly. The pilot was killed. The co-pilot was wounded. The bombardier was wounded. I think the engineer put him on a line and threw him out of the plane. The navigator was wounded. He eventually lost an arm and the sight of one eye. It was also on this mission that our assistant engineer was killed, and I was wounded. Make a long story short, we still had some engines. The co-pilot tried to take the plane down to hit the deck and maybe get to Switzerland or some other place, but we were hit on the way down while he was trying to get down to the ground, and apparently he lost control of the airplane to a large degree. But he did manage to land it. The reason we didn't bail out, by the way, is because by the time we knew we weren't going to salvage anything and get back, we were too low to bail out, really. So, although one of the waist gunners did bail out, and saw him later, he told me that he jumped out, pulled a ripcord, parachute opened, and he was pulled up in the air with great force, and then he came down and hit the ground and was captured. The plane, apparently he tried to crash land the plane in a big field, but it broke up when it hit the ground. Part of it went into a large brick building that was in the middle of the field. I don't know where I got the idea, but I think somebody told me that was a brewery, and the front part of the plane crashed into that. The co-pilot must have turned the engines off right before it crashed because it didn't blow up, but he was killed too. And then the next thing I really remember was waking up in a hay cart. I remember waking up in this hay cart, but I should stress that the Lieutenant our pilot, was killed by enemy fire. Our co-pilot, Lieutenant Baker, was wounded by enemy fire and apparently killed in the crash. Our navigator lost his arm and his eye through enemy fire. Our bombardier lost his eyesight, and his whole body was covered with flak wounds. I saw him later in the hospital. That was likewise through enemy fire. The assistant engineer, who was really our ball turret operator, immediately before the plane crashed, I remember seeing him outside the ball turret standing up over the superstructure. He looked to me like he was bleeding, but then it was at that point that the navigator came through the airplane, not knowing where he was going and being in a sort of a daze. And I happened to look out. I think I was hit by that time myself, but not bad. And I looked out the door where a waist gunner had just bailed out, and I could see the pickets in the picket fence wherever we were, and decided that nobody could do anything. So I grabbed the navigator and pulled him down behind some armor plate in the waist and laid over top of him, and then that was all she wrote. The fighters followed us down. They were shooting all the way down. But in any event, I woke up in the hay cart, and I wasn't fully conscious, I'm sure of that, but I do remember seeing the plane, parts of the plane scattered over the field. I remember seeing a brick building. It was a German-type building. It reminded me like the Deutsches House looked downtown some years ago, except out in the middle of a big field and with a brick wall around a huge, not high particularly, but a long brick wall around it. This, as I said, I got the idea that this was a brewery, but I don't know why. In any event, the trip to the hospital, which I found out later was in Brunswick, Germany, was done by horses on this cart. I believe the assistant engineer, who was still alive, was next to me. And I don't remember the others, but they must have been in the cart with me or near me. Maybe they walked alongside of it. But I know I was in and out of consciousness the whole time during this period of time. Finally, I woke up in a hospital in Brunswick, apparently a nice building, and I remember seeing our assistant engineer in the bed next to me, and the nurses had apparently cleaned him up and all, and he was just laying there. Then I remember waking up that night and looking over, and his face was covered with a sheet, so I figured incorrectly that he had died. I don't remember too much about this hospital in Brunswick. It seems to me the nurses were nuns, and they didn't do a whole lot one way or the other for me. They must have brought me food and drink, but again, I was passing in and out of consciousness. In any event, they must have determined I was in good enough shape to be moved, because it couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 days, maybe not that long, before I was transported to Frankfurt, Germany. That was the interrogation center. I don't remember exactly how I got to... I don't remember leaving the hospital in Brunswick, but I know I left it because it wasn't long after that before I remember arriving in Frankfurt. That's Frankfurt on the Main, the interrogation center. But we must have gone by train, because I remember walking along the streets of Frankfurt and then waiting apparently for a streetcar. There was no time streetcar came down the street, and it was myself and about 4 or 5 other people were put on the streetcar. I remember the Germans that were on the street. It was a civilian streetcar, and I remember the Germans staring at me and looking funny at me, but it was then that I realized that my head was wrapped up with paper bandages, and that the bandages were all bloody. I still had on the blue flying suit that I had on, the electric suit that I had on the day we were shot down. And I still had the electric boots, the big tan-colored boots on my feet. But again, these recollections are pretty vague, because I'm sure I was passing out off and on. Not as often, not as bad as it was before, but from this point on, my recollections improved. And I remember going on the streetcar to the outskirts of the city, wherever the interrogation center was, and walking from there to the interrogation center, but I can't remember how long a distance that was. This was the first prison camp that I'd ever seen. And of course it had barbed wire fences around it, and it looked like temporary barracks built, but the barracks had separate rooms in them. In any event, I was processed through there. I don't remember whether they took any pictures of me then or not, but they may well have done so. Then I was placed in solitary confinement, as I believe all the prisoners that went to this center were all